Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Larry Stutzream. I go by Stutz. I'm the Director of Research for the Mitchell Institute, and welcome to Aerospace Nation. Today, the Mitchell Institute is honored to have General Thomas Bussiere, Commander of Air Force Global Strike Command. Global Strike Command's mission has never been more vital, given we're now living in a time when our great nation is facing an unprecedented array of threats to its security. This includes the return of the potential for the conflict between the United States and a peer adversary. The command is key to the nation's ability to deter both conventional and nuclear attack. First, it maintains two legs of our nuclear triad, which remains the ultimate backstop of our national security. Second, Global Strike Command operates the free world's only bomber force that's capable of conducting long-range strikes anywhere on the face of the planet at a time of our nation's choosing. Finally, should deterrence fail and the fighting begin, the warfighters of Global Strike Command will strike deep at the adversary's ability to fight. It's an unrivaled force needed to win. So General Bussiere, thank you so much for being with us today, taking the time. I'd like to give you a couple minutes. Tell us what's going on in the command and maybe a few of your priorities.
Thanks, Stutz. Thanks to you and the Mitchell Institute for allowing me to come on and talk about two things: our nation's most important mission,
of course, and
our airmen who support and enable that mission for our allies and partners in the United States of America. So it's an interesting time. I will start by saying what I always say when I do speeches or interviews is I want to start by first thanking and recognizing our airmen who are doing the mission right now. Operators, maintainers, defenders, and support personnel across the fabric of our nation, performing our nation's most important mission.
Here, here.
I'd also like to recognize their families that support and enable their service. A lot of folks will look at the strategic triad and go, why are we doing this? We're never going to use it. We use it every day. Mm-hmm. The mission is 24/7, 365. So with that being said, I think you've probably heard me say before that the world is more dangerous now than it's been in my career. Coupled with that, we now have the recapitalization of the entire nuclear triad. Recap the air leg, the land leg, and the sea leg at a time when our nation is across the globe dealing with threats and potential threats to our nation's freedom. So as we look at the fabric of the world and we look at the recapitalization of the nuclear triad, the Air Force and Air Force Global Strike Command has the privilege of maintaining 2/3 of that triad. I would offer to you, if we had the opportunity to look back and go, let's not recapitalize the entire triad in the same time, maybe do it every 10 years versus all at the same time.
Yeah, right.
We might have done that, but we didn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
So the challenge ahead is maintaining the current force, maintaining our current strategic deterrence posture while we field new capabilities. And we have to maintain full operational capability while we do that. That is a testament to our airmen. That's a testament to our families that support our airmen. It's a testament to the communities around our installations that support our airmen and their families. And I'd like to highlight the fact that our Department of the Air Force, Department of Defense, and the senior leaders in Congress that have made sure we had the resources to do this most important mission maintains steady support.
Mm. Well, it's a great setup for us to get into some detail, if we could.
Absolutely.
First, the complexity of your operating environment involves so many dynamically changing factors. Of course, the threat. You've got geopolitical trends. You've got technology competition. You have, of course, an aging force that's served very well over decade after decade. How do you see that complexity? And I especially wonder how you see the response to the Bomber Task Force. I mean, isn't the demand for long-range strike higher than ever?
Absolutely. So as you know, we have 141 bombers in the inventory between the B-1, the B-2, and the B-52. the demand signal for the bombers is greater than any time I've seen in my career across the fabric of every geographic combatant command. Just this year, you've seen our command get tasked to do combat missions with the B-1 in the Middle East. Yeah. You've seen just recently the B-2 being tasked to do combat missions in the Middle East. The never-ending demand signal from the geographic combatant commanders for what we label and use as bomber task forces. So B-1s, B-2s, and B-52s travel across the fabric of the globe at the request of the regional combatant commands to show the American flag, show American air power, to assure our allies and partners in the regions that we are there, and to provide great pause to any potential adversary that we can take off from the United States of America and go anywhere in the world at a time and place of our choosing. Right now, today, we have bombers in the Middle East and in Europe performing bomber task force missions. And right today, we have airmen being prepared to support any tasking that the Department of Defense gives us.
It's interesting. You know, when we talk about deterrence calculus, your adversary needs to see the capability you have. And I can see how your bombers out there send quite a clear message to anyone who wants to aggress against us or our partners.
Well, I mean, it's a very visible demonstration of U.S. military and resolve on what we can do. Our bomber task force missions are not just the ability to go out and exercise and participate in regional events. The last 12 months has probably seen the highest level of activity across the globe, both in the European theater and in the Indo-Pacific theater. Engagements and interactions and training with partners and allies across the globe. We've done more in the last 12 months than I think we've done in the last 20 years.
That's incredible. Yeah.
With a fleet that's fairly old,
You're right.
and a force that's fairly stretched just based on the demand signal. You know that our B-52s are, I think we celebrated the 72nd anniversary of the first flight of the B-52 this year. And our newest airplane, the B-2, is over 30 years old. Yeah. So as we continue to provide that service across the department for all the combatant commands, we are in the midst of recapitalizing everything.
This is a perfect lead in to my next question. You know, we've heard all about the fiscal pressures that threaten to delay modernization of Global Strike Command's major weapon systems, including the two legs of the triad. What are your concerns about continuing to rely on aging weapon systems and as the replacements are developed, and how are you mitigating the risks created by some of the program delays?
So across the fabric, whether it's the bomber leg, the land leg, or our NC3 platforms, or our weapons platforms, there has been consistent support and recognition that we have to recapitalize. A lot of people don't understand, and I try to help kind of spread the word that the nation's nuclear triad is something that's directed by our nation. I think we're on our 11th straight administration, political party agnostic, that has studied and directed a triad. So the Air Force has the privilege of being stewards of 2/3 of that triad, and obviously the Navy maintains the sea leg. So it's directed by our nation. There are several laws codified in Congress over the last several decades that also requires that we have a strong, credible nuclear deterrent. So while we recapitalize, we have to maintain that nuclear deterrent with a very aged system. Yeah. The Minuteman III is a 54-year-old system. We already talked about the age of the bomber fleet. The unique aspect of our business is we have to maintain full operational capability while we transition. Yeah. That's never been done. Yeah. And that's a challenge when we are doing it all at the same time. So maintaining the current fleet is a testament to our operators and maintainers and those that support those platforms. It's a testament to my partners in Air Force Material Command that maintain the supply base and the spare parts and the depot maintenance apparatus. It's a testament to my partners in the Guard and Reserve that help us. It's a testament to our partners in Air Force Material Command and Mobility Command. We can't exercise global power without our airlift and tanker brothers and sisters. That whole apparatus is quite frankly under great stress because of the demand signals.
Yeah, right. Wow. We'll get back a little bit later to some issues of ICBMs, but in a time like this, there's talk that we periodically percolates up. For example, alternatives to Sentinel, like replacing Minuteman III with a mobile ICBM force, or even cutting its size to save money, modernization costs, so to speak. So could you once again talk specifically about the importance of Sentinel, that recapitalization?
So I think everyone's aware we went through the Nunn-McCurdy process in the department this year, and in July, the Department of Defense recertified the program as a requirement for national security. Now, again, I go back to the basic fact that the nation has directed that we maintain this. If the nation decides that we no longer need a triad, which they haven't done in over 11 straight administrations, then we'll execute whatever we're directed to execute. Right now, we're directed to have a triad. Right now, we are directed to recapitalize that triad. The Sentinel program is the program of record to recapitalize the land leg to replace the 54-year-old Minuteman III weapon system. We also have, again, a lot of people don't understand that not only is that directed by the President and Congress, it's actually in law that we have to replace that weapon system and the numbers within that weapon system. So we will replace 450 ICBM launch facilities with 450 Sentinel launch facilities. If the nation, the President, and Congress direct us to do something different, we will do that. There's been debate and discussion over the decades on whether or not we should have a mobile aspect or component of the land leg of the triad. It's been studied. The nation's determined we're not there yet. So that is a policy decision. If the nation decides that we are going to implement some sort of a mobile part or component of the ICBM leg, then we will develop concepts and go through that process. But right now, that's been looked at and decided into something we're not going to do.
Let me ask you something related with respect to the bombers. And I understand what you're saying, that these are choices that are directed, and your command's doing a fantastic job, keeping the mission on the peak of readiness. When we talk about the B-21, do you foresee over the next decade or so a need to accelerate its procurement because of what's happening with China and Russia being more aggressive, building their stockpiles and so forth? Ramp up in B-21 perhaps in the future?
I think most national security professionals would look at the B-21 and the current production schedule and go, we might want to consider evaluating whether or not we can accelerate that based on the age of the B-2 and the B-1 fleet. That's a prudent question in light of the threats that are out there and the demand signals for bombers. That's a very valid discussion. Normally, the answer is who would not want more long-range strike platforms?
Of course.
And it really gets down to the fundamentals of the budget, right? It's a service budget issue. It's a department budget issue. It's a national budget issue. So I'm a firm believer that if the nation decides they need something, they'll invest in it, and invest in it in a agile way to make something happen. There's several examples in the last couple of decades where our nation has invested something, national treasure into those aspects that they think are important for either the nation or our national security needs. There are several examples in the last 5 or 10 years where we've evaluated what the proper fleet size should be. Right now, the B-21 program is at least 100. That's the program of record. But going back at least 5 years, the department, both the Chief of Staff of the Air Force and the Secretary of the Air Force at the time, has gone on record and testified before Congress that 220 bombers, when we finally transition to a B-52J and a B-21 fleet, is the number that the nation the Air Force would need. That data and that fleet size probably needs to be reevaluated based on the world as we see it today.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a force mix discussion within the Department of the Air Force, and it's a resource and priority within the Department of Defense of the nation and what we need to invest in.
Yeah. Well, we'll continue from Mitchell Institute to educate folks on needs and where we're at in the world today. I want to jump to a topic, an airman's topic, and that is that the Air Force has said the nation needs both long-range stand-in capabilities like the B-2 and the B-21, but it also needs standoff systems like B-52s and B-1s that can carry munitions, cruise missiles, that can launch into contested airspace or contested areas. What are your thoughts about the right balance of stand-in and standoff capabilities in the design of the future force?
Yeah, so the concept of what the force mix would be between, in this case, the long-term vision is be a two-bomber force between the B-21, the ability to penetrate heavily in defended target areas and hold at risk whatever the nation's been directed or whatever the Air Force has been directed to hold at risk. That mix between stand-in and standoff is really a byproduct of cost. The weapons needed to affect whatever we've been directed to affect on any potential target. Some targets are going to require a penetrating capability. Some targets don't. But we don't necessarily look at it in a discrete binary manner of standoff or stand-in. We look at it more from a holistic perspective of what capabilities are required to affect whatever's required on a potential target anywhere on the world. And that's not just from a bomber perspective, from a service and a joint perspective. What are the capabilities and capacities in multiple domains needed to affect a military operation to do whatever required on whatever point on the planet we're directed to do. So right now, the Air Force is looking at 75 B-52Js, which is a standoff, long-range standoff bomber, and then the B-21 as a very exquisite penetrating bomber.
I know a lot about the B-52 because we have on our staff Gonzo Gunzinger, and that's all he talks about.
Well, it's been around for a while.
He's got some stories, let me tell you. There was I'll harken back, there was a joint study that informed the Department of Defense's decision to acquire a new penetrating bomber, the B-21. And it stated something to the effect that penetrating bombers were the most cost-effective means of conducting long-range strikes at scale. Is that still true?
It is. And that's from a conventional perspective, right? But you actually have a 2-for-1 special with the bomber force that is tasked to do both conventional global strike as well as nuclear deterrence. Right. So if it's most platforms don't do both. The bomber leg or the air leg of the triad actually performs both conventional long-range global strike as well as strategic deterrence for the nation and U.S. Strategic Command. So if you balance that out and then you balance out the capabilities inherent in an exquisite low observable platform, and you look at the history of the B-2 program and the efficiencies both in number of aircraft, weapons that are capable of being employed in a conflict scenario, and then those efficiencies are realized. And we've demonstrated that over the last few decades with both B-52s, B-1s, and B-2s.
Yeah. Not to go into war stories too deeply, but when we used the bombers over in Afghanistan, there's so much flexibility in the conventional attack role, and the bombers became almost the centerpiece, the first thing requested, even in that fairly benign environment, combat environment. So it makes a lot of sense still.
Yeah, range, payload, loitering, duration of the flight. If my memory serves me correctly, the first use of the B-2 in combat in Allied force in 1999, the B-2 flew 1% of the missions and yet serviced over 11% of the targets.
Yeah, that's right.
So again, if you look at it from a very practical standpoint, you get more effective use from a sortie or number of aircraft perspective, and there are many examples of that.
Yeah. Well, maybe it would help our audience understand a little more about the design, the force design, and see what you think about some of these things. The Air Force, has long held that the B-21's the foundation of a long-range strike family of systems, and that includes next-generation weapons, ISR, and other capabilities. And it's supported, or the plan or the structure is supported by a next generation air dominance family of systems. Is this, with what we said in the very first question about the complexity of your operating environment, is this still a valid concept, or is this changed significantly because the world's changed?
No, I think the concept is still extremely valid. I would offer to you that the strength of that concept is unleashing our airmen's innovation. So specific to the B-21 and that program, what we've done very effectively is we've partnered with industry and our acquisition professionals and Air Force Materiel Command and the Rapid Capabilities Office. And I would say that's an exemplar of a program where you take operators, maintainers, acquisition professionals, industry professionals, and you embed them together, and they'll develop capabilities and capacities that will water your eyes.
Yeah.
And so now the B-2 is a phenomenal aircraft, demonstrated in combat across the globe in the last 30 years. The B-21, in my opinion, is the most exquisite weapon system ever built by human hands. And that fact is underpinned by the airmen and the engineers and the acquisition professionals that work together to build it. It is an amazing platform, and that platform is not amazing just because it's a cool airplane. It's amazing because it'll provide our nation, the Department of Defense and combatant commanders, the ability to, I would say, negotiate from a position of strength.
Very well said. What you said about bringing those, kind of unleashing the innovation, the technologists, the warfighter, and industry together, that's a recipe for success.
It is.
Yeah, really is. Well, I can't fail to ask you a munitions question. We classically in our acquisition programs, platforms can get disconnected with munitions, and so I pose a question to you, not too daring, I hope, but if the Air Force couldn't afford in the budget space they have to acquire new munitions that are designed for highly contested environments, or even the NGAD for that matter, how does that affect the ability to do your mission?
So that's a really good question. So we're fielding a very exquisite, low observable strike platform. And rest assured, our again, the same thing, industry, acquisition professionals, and our airmen are developing capabilities, concepts, and weapons to pair up with that exquisite strike platform. And can't say much more about it other than that, but we have great industry, acquisition, and airmen who are doing wonderful things to optimize the capability and capacity of the B-21. And as you know, we have our current portfolio of weapons that we're currently using on the B-1, the B-2, and the B-52 that will maintain our ability to hold at risk what we're directed to hold at risk until we do field new capabilities. The Department of the Air Force and the Department of Defense fully recognize that we need to upgrade and optimize our munitions portfolio, and I believe the focus is in the right place.
Yeah, and your staff is very, very bold in making sure that folks understand that those principles. I appreciate that here at Mitchell Institute. We enjoy working with the staff, by the way. I want to pitch back to the deterrence discussion a little bit. During the Cold War, of course, we had one nuclear adversary, that was the Soviet Union. And today we face two big ones. You've got Russia that's modernized its inventory about its entire nuclear infrastructure, about 95% over the last few decades, 3 decades. And then you have China rapidly growing its own triad, probably seeking parity with the United States. So is there a need, do you think, once again, we talked about this a little bit, but the size, the sizing of our nuclear forces, is that important to talk about now, or
it is, and I believe the nation is, right? Yeah. So Congress directed a bipartisan strategic commission to look at exactly that, the posture of our department and our nation to be able to deter and face the threats as we're seeing today and out into the coming decades. So the current force posture that we have today, I think most people are familiar that is based on essentially a 2010 threat, right? So whether it's the combatant command, the Congress, or the Department of Defense, prudent steps are being taken to make sure that we understand what's the proper force mix, what's the proper posture of that force to be able to deter nefarious activities, to be able to assure our allies and partners that we provide the extended deterrence umbrella to, that we have that capability and capacity to do what we're going to do, and probably just as important, to make sure that any potential adversary understands that we maintain the watch for our nation and those allies and partners that we have that obligation to. And it's not easy. So the little secret that a lot of people don't understand is that our airmen make it look easy. Yeah. It is not easy. Yeah. It is a huge task that they do every day, and they make it look easy so everyone thinks it's easy, but it's not.
It's a tremendous can-do spirit the Air Force Airmen show every day. Well, let's talk a little more about Sentinel for a second. A lot of focus on its cost. You mentioned the Nunn-McCurdy issue. What's going right with that program? What's going on with its schedule, and why is it important to keep that on track?
So I guess I would characterize it slightly differently. I don't want to marginalize the Nunn-McCurdy breach, right? So that's a really big deal.
Right.
There's a reason the law exists. But the program to recapitalize the land leg and replace the Minuteman III weapon system, there's a lot going right. So what we kind of did differently with the Sentinel weapon system that we didn't initially do with the Minuteman III was we're fielding the weapon system with all the components inherent in the program that is Sentinel, right, that we didn't do initially 50 plus years ago when we built the Minuteman I, II, and then III weapon system. So a lot of the pieces and parts and facilities and components of the Minuteman weapon system were really not part of a weapon system. So our command, Air Force Global Strike Command, is 15 years old this year, right? Yeah. So when our command stood up, one of the first steps that the first and second commander of the Air Force Global Strike did was consolidate the elements of the current land leg, the Minuteman weapon system, into what the Air Force would label as a weapon system, to be able to account for the condition, the spare parts, the sustainment, and the modernization of those components. That was not done initially with the program. The Sentinel weapon system accounts for everything.
Yeah.
So it accounts for the launch facilities, the launch control facilities, the components between those, the missile, the equipment that supports the movement of the weapon from the main base out to the launch facilities. So no kidding, the Sentinel weapon system is being managed and developed as a weapon system. The preponderance of the challenges within the Sentinel weapon system that drove the number McCurdy was the sheer size, scale, and scope of it, right? So we're replacing 450 launch facilities and the launch control centers that support that.
Right.
That's a lot of concrete, steel, and labor. So that was really the impetus behind the cost growth. And it's not unique to the Sentinel weapon system or Air Force Global Strike Command. We've seen cost growth in those areas across the fabric of the nation and the department in the last few years. It's just exacerbated by the sheer size of the Sentinel weapons program. It's been described as the largest works project our nation's undertaken since the Eisenhower Interstate Program. It is just a massive program. So that was kind of really the underpinning of it. That doesn't mean we're not going to have efficiencies in the restructure of the program. That doesn't mean that we can't adjust the little r of the requirements. The big requirement for the program is sound, and our team is working with Air Force Materiel Command to make sure that's done very deliberately, and it's a great team that's working together. And we're trying to emulate some of the successes that we did with the B-21 program in partnering with all the different entities that have a program, part of the Sentinel program. We've had great support from OSD. We've had great support from the Joint Staff. We've had great support with the major commands within the Department of the Air Force, and we are embedded with our industry partners to make sure we get this right for our nation.
Yeah. Fantastic. And those facilities, 60 years old, that need all, with a lot of growth around them, in terms of property ownership and so forth, very challenging. So out in the commentary, when we talk about this, some thoughts that would there be a benefit in any way of separating the Sentinel missile cost separate from the ground segment? And maybe even if you do that, take the ground segment and put it into, MILCON, military construction accounts. Any thoughts on that?
The program and the budget for the program is consolidated in one weapon system. So all the physical construction is military construction, but it is embedded in the overall program. It's embedded in the overall program by design from the Air Force perspective, and I'm fairly confident of this. Can't quote you exactly the law, but it's also embedded in law that we will keep it all coupled as one together. So there are, from 2011 to 2023, there are a multitude of NDAA laws that were given to the Department and the Air Force specific to the land leg and the Sentinel weapon system. So there's great interest on the Hill to make sure we get this right, and there's great oversight. It's probably the most oversighted program in the department right now because of its size, its cost, and its importance. And we welcome that oversight because we want to make sure we get this right.
Yeah, quite a challenge. So how about nuclear command and control and communications? And we refer to that as NC3. Very important part. Some folks have said it's the fourth leg of the triad, which doesn't quite make sense. But this is, from the president down to the nuclear forces, that very important way to control those forces and command them. Can you lay out what's going on with that modernization a bit and why that's important?
Yeah, absolutely. So I look at NC3, Nuclear Command and Control of Communications, as the kind of the foundation, the underpinning of our triad, right? So we have our land leg, our air leg, and our sea leg. We have great airmen, soldiers, sailors, Marines, and Guardians that perform different aspects of the nuclear deterrence mission. But all of that is underpinned by our ability to command and control it, right? So we could have the best weapon, the best weapon system, the greatest installation across the fabric of the triad. But the credibility of that deterrence force is the ability for it to be controlled any second of any day from the president down to the fielded forces. So that is a very important aspect of strategic deterrence for our nation. The Air Force, and I say Air Force, I include air and space in this because Space Force has a very important part of NC3, and the Department of the Air Force Air has a very important part of NC3. The Department of the Air Force writ large has about 75% of all the capabilities the nation has for NC3, and Air Force Global Strike Command from the air side has the preponderance of the operational responsibilities, and of course we partner with Air Force Materiel Command to maintain the sustainment and modernization of that. The most prominent piece of that, I think, is out in the public sphere, is the National Airborne Operations Center replacement, which is the Survivable Airborne Operations Center that was just awarded this year by the department, and that's a 747 platform that provides a resilient, survivable air component of the NC3 app. But we have obviously different systems, different command centers, different radios, different processes to be able to do that. It underpins everything in the triad.
Mm-hmm. You know, some of the older guys from the Cold War days, you know, they think back on, the old structure was copper wire tubes, very unhackable kind of thing. But this modernization is going to see a lot of smart technological modernization. Can you talk to any concerns about where that's going?
Yeah, absolutely. Across the board, whether it's the land leg, the air leg, or NC3, we're transitioning what I would say is from analog to digital. And as we upgrade and modernize those systems and capabilities across the triad, we have to be mindful of any cyber threats. So, you know, copper wire versus fiber is a different dynamic. Pros and cons of both. We are transitioning into the digital world, and with that transition requires very deliberate and disciplined approach for cybersecurity. Right. Physical security is kind of the same between the two.
Sure.
But we work it's not only baked into the programs, the acquisition programs, it's baked into our acquisition for modernization of our systems. And I will tell you, it's probably one of the top areas the Department of Defense is focused on to make sure we get it right.
Yeah, that's very good. Let me ask you one last question. And you know, you're a bomber pilot, and so let's talk a little bit about some of the operations you've had going on. You had the recent Spirit Vigilance exercise, and you took airmen from two wings, the 509th, 131st, I believe. Those wing airmen got 12 B-2s into the air. Why are these exercises important? And we add to that, you know, the bomber task forces. We started by talking about how they enhance endurance, but in a bigger view, besides the deterrence, the force itself, why are these important?
So the exercise regimen, each one of the bomber wings, so the 2nd Bomb Wing, the 5th Bomb Wing, the 509th Bomb Wing. So the 509th Bomb Wing and the 131st Bomb Wing are a classic association between the Missouri Air National Guard and the active duty unit at the B-2 wing. It is a great partnership of the Air National Guard and the active duty to perform both the conventional and the nuclear long-range strike platform mission for the B-2. So each one of my bases does a series of vigilance exercises every year. And that is the wing's opportunity to generate, to provide confidence to our operators, maintainers, defenders, and support airmen that do that mission, that they can execute and generate to the required levels. It's really it's twofold. It's the ability to make sure, from a leadership perspective, you get confidence that you can execute the mission you've been tasked to do. From an airman perspective, you get to really do your job and demonstrate it. Other than, not that training's not important, because it is, but
Yes.
demonstrate it to connect directly to the operational mission. And each wing does that a couple times a year. Then the larger exercise that we do for our combatant command, U.S. Strategic Command, is called Global Thunder. I think everyone's familiar with that term. That's an annual exercise where we demonstrate across the fabric of Air Force Global Strike Command our capabilities to be able to provide General Cotton at U.S. Strategic Command the requirements that he's levied on the Department of the Air Force to perform his mission for the nation. And we do that routinely, small to a wing level to a command level, major command level. That is different and separate and distinct from the bomber task forces that we do. That is a never-ending demand signal that we get tasked through U.S. Strategic Command. A lot of people don't understand that General Cotton has not only a strategic deterrence nuclear mission, he also has a mission of conventional global strike. And we perform that when tasked primarily with our bomber leg. And that's really manifested through the bomber task force process, where we send people what we call CONUS to CONUS, so we'll from the United States out to somewhere in the world and back, and demonstrate long-range air power. Or we do smaller deployments where we actually deploy a force like we have now in Europe and in the Middle East at the request of the combatant command, either to do, no kidding, real-world combat missions, or to do exercises and demonstrations for our allies and partners.
Very good. Well, we've come to the end of this segment. I really appreciate this, you being forthright with us. Very, very interesting. Would you give our best to the men and women of Global Strike Command?
Absolutely.
They're doing a superb job. So we're going to open up the session now to questions from the audience. And you all know the drill by now. You can raise your hand, the raise the hand function in Zoom. And Josh Baker, who's one of our research analysts, will call on you. Please unmute your mic, state your name and affiliation before asking your question. You can also submit your questions using the Q&A function on Zoom. So with that, Josh, who do we have first?
Hey, Stutz, we have a question from John Tripack in the chat. John, please unmute your mic.
Hi, John.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Morning, General. Thanks for doing this. I appreciate it. A few years ago, the senior leadership was talking about a collaborative combat aircraft for the strategic forces as well as for the tactical forces. That seemed to have been put on the shelf. Is that something that you anticipate you're going to need? When might you need it? And is that something where you could use the Increment 1 aircraft that are now being developed, or would you need something tailored to your force?
John, I think the Department of the Air Force is looking at that. I won't get out ahead of the chief or the secretary, but it's a logical question to ask whether or not long-range strike would benefit from the CCA concept. I think we're going to let the fighter force kind of mature that concept and with Inc. 1 of the CCA, and then we'll be prepared to integrate that into the long-range strike platform family of systems, probably at a later date if directed. But it's a reasonable question to ask whether or not there's some value to pairing long-range strike platforms with CCAs. I mean, the obvious limitation probably that we would have to consider is the range, right? So long-range strike platforms have significantly longer ranges than the current design CCAs. So that'll be considered as we go forward. But right now, we don't actually have that in the plan.
Thanks, John. Josh, what else?
We have a question from Frank Wolf.
Hi there. Hi, General. I just wondered if you had any sort of thoughts on if there is a decision to ramp up B-21. What are some of your thoughts on how to do that? Possibly bringing in another company, for example, to bring more factory space online to sort of aid Northrop Grumman possibly in doing that. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that, if there is a decision.
Yeah, so if the Department of the Air Force, the Department of Defense, or Congress directs a accelerated ramp um, or more quicker for the B-21 program, there's some capability growth within the current complex. Won't get into the details on those, but we deeply understand what the capabilities are to potentially accelerate and ramp within the current program of record. If there was a decision to really increase numbers and in a shorter time period, I'm not guessing that going to another company per se would probably be the most efficient way, but I would defer to my acquisition professionals on that. But more than likely, it would require opening up another production complex if the nation decided to do that.
Right. Well, thank you. Just very quickly on, I appreciated your sort of comments on Sentinel, and sort of the history with Minuteman. But my understanding, I guess, the contract for Minuteman to Boeing was October of 1958, and then less than 4 years later, we had missiles going into silos. So by the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis at Malmstrom, we had missiles in the ground. Now you take Sentinel. The contract was awarded to Northrop Grumman in 2020. Now we've got acquisition strategy review. We've got a rescission of the engineering and manufacturing development by the Pentagon in July. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts on that, and just in terms of the stage that the acquisition strategy review is in right now. Has it halted because of the change in administration? Is the work still ongoing where you're looking at line by line in terms of the size of launch facilities, utility corridors, the amount of concrete required, steel, and all the fiber optic wiring that's going to be required? Or what's going on with it, and how do you get it back on track?
With the administration change.
Okay.
I think you're familiar that when Honorable LaPlante from OSD recertified the program in the Department of Defense and then to Congress this past July, that kind of reinitiated the process and the steps to go to milestone B again. But the program hasn't stopped. But all the work that's going on in the design phase, there's been a very robust, what I would say is cross-functional team of professionals in the Minuteman III weapon system right now, industry, OSD partners, and all the different elements in the federal, various different federal departments that have a play. And there's several, by the way. I'm sure you are aware how large a program in this, as well as the Army Corps of Engineers, that are working together and are holding summits routinely to capture and consolidate and address each one of the aspects that you mentioned in your question. So that is ongoing. That's not paused at all. And we have routine updates with the Secretary of the Air Force level forums, as well as senior members of industry, as well as senior members in the Department of the Air Force in the military uniform side. Nothing has stopped.
I've got a text question here, real quick. Do you feel the same pressures Air Combat Command does with respect to crew manning or crew shortages or any kind of other personnel issues with respect to having enough?
So across the Department of the Air Force, I think we're realizing stresses on the rated force. That's a byproduct of several different things. There's experience imbalances between the age and qualifications of our aviators. There are some number shortfalls within the rated career field. A lot of times it's a byproduct of whether or not there's a good economy or not on the outside for aviators. There's a readiness challenge just because of the age of our fleets and the ability to generate sorties to maintain. That's kind of generic across the Department of the Air Force. The Air Staff is working aggressively to make sure we can address those shortfalls. General Richardson and Air Force Materiel Command and his team are working aggressively to address the sustainment, the spare parts, the depot maintenance inflows and outflows. It is a massive process to do that, but the bomber fleet is not immune to the same things that other careers or other weapon systems are experiencing.
Yeah. Hey, Josh, next question.
Yeah, so we got a question in the chat here. It reads, it's from Charles Orff, and he says, what are your thoughts on the 2024 Strategic Posture Commission's report's recommendation for additional U.S. theater nuclear capabilities in Europe and Indo-Pacific regions to deter adversary nuclear use and offset local conventional superiority, as well as planning and preparations for a portion of the future bomber fleet to be on continuous alert status?
So I execute policy, I don't make it. So if directed, we will do whatever we're directed to do. So the European theater already has the DCA mission. We are the bomber leg is the visible deterrence force that can go anywhere in the world. If we're directed to go back on alert, we will execute that. And if we are directed to move the bombers around the planet to provide more assurance and deterrence capabilities in those different regions, we'll do that. I believe the Strategic Posture Commission's report was very thorough, and I'm confident the Department of the Air Force and Department of Defense are taking their recommendations very seriously.
Very good. Next question, Josh.
We have a question from John Harper.
Great. Thanks for doing this, General. Can you talk a little bit more about the benefits of having a more digital infrastructure for your NC3 enterprise? What advantages might that give you compared to what you have now with more of an analog system? And what are the big challenges there? Is it getting the hardware in place? Is it the software? Is it, getting the funding? What challenges are you trying to tackle as you try to make that transformation with your NC3 enterprise?
My concerns are really bounded by the cyber threat, right? So that's probably the largest concern. All the other aspects of protecting and ensuring the resilience of NC3 are really no different, in my opinion, between a digital and an analog capability. I think everyone knows that with a digital backbone, your ability to upgrade, to do open mission architecture for capabilities and capacities will provide the ability to maintain the systems ahead of any potential threats. It's a more reliable, resilient system. And I guess I can't imagine going back and fielding a new capability in the 2020 and 2030s and not taking advantage of the technologies that have been developed over the last several decades. But we have to be wide-eyed open and make sure we account for and understand the threats and develop a capability and capacity and give our airmen the tools to maintain it and secure it. That's probably my biggest focus.
Thanks. And just a quick follow-up. How will, the NC3 modernization fit in with this CJADC2 concept? Will that be more stovepiped and kind of separate from that just because of the sensitivity of the nuclear mission, or do you see those as kind of being integrated?
I wouldn't say integrated as much as dovetailed together, right? So the requirements for NC3 are very distinct and kind of transcend across all the different capabilities and capacities that are within the triad. The efforts that are going on right now in the department, we are dovetailed into those efforts, and we're going to take advantage of the concepts, the technologies, and the tools they're developing. So we're kind of embedded, but we do have very distinct responsibilities when we field the next generation of NC3. And again, I think everyone that's listening understands that not only like the weapon systems, when we replace or modernize our NC3 systems, we have a requirement to maintain full capability to command and control the force while we do that. So it's as we transition from analog to digital, as we transition from a legacy capability to a new, we have to maintain that capability as we transition and across the fabric, which is something our nation has never done. We have to do this right.
Very good. Josh, another question?
We have a question from Joe Kunzler.
Hi, Joe Kunzler, Simple Flying here. Thank you for your service to Belvedere. Serious question on the B-21. How will Global Strike Command employ the B-21, especially in a conventional role, as we haven't seen it go out on exercises yet? Thank you.
Well, we haven't operationally fielded it yet. So we do have airplanes doing developmental tests right now. So we haven't stood up the first operational wing yet. So, but my confidence level in our airmen be able to field this weapon system and operate it is pretty high because we've demonstrated it with the B-2 program for over 3 decades. And so we have expertise in operations. We have expertise in command and control for long-range strike platforms. We have expertise in maintenance and low observable maintenance. And we're going to grow that within the command because we're going from 1 low observable strike wing to 3. So we do have to build a greater depth of understanding across the fabric of the command for our airmen who have not maybe worked on a low observable platform. But my confidence is pretty high that we'll be able to do that pretty seamlessly.
Thank you. Quick follow-up. When do we expect the B-21 in an operational unit?
Soon.
Thank you, General.
Thank you, General Bussiere. Really appreciate you being here today. We've come to the end of this Aerospace Nation. I want to especially thank Moose Hoffman. He's been great setting this up. And of course, in the studio, we have your Captain Blanton. Both have been just superb, along with the rest of your team.
I appreciate it.
You bet. So that's it for today. For our audience out there, have a great Air and Space Power Day.